One of the most beautiful places in the world that I have ever traveled to is Acadia National Park in Maine. Now, Acadia is beautiful and well loved by people for many different reasons, but one of the claim to fame that the park has is that for half of the year, Cadillac Mountain in Acadia is the first place that you can see the sunrise in the continental US. And daily throughout the year, people will hike or drive up Cadillac Mountain in order to be able to say that they were among the first people to see the sunrise that day. And it is well worth getting up early to go and to see that sight, because when you're on the top of the mountain, you have an unobstructed view of the horizon. You're looking out over the trees and the waters and some of the inlets and islands of Maine to see the sun rise without anything to distract from that view. Now, visitors are urged, if you're going to see the sunrise from Cadillac Mountain, you really want to get to the peak of the mountain at least a half hour before the sun begins to rise, in order to allow an appreciation of all of the colors that can show up in the pre-dawn sky. And so when my husband and I visited Acadia a couple of years ago, as it was dark in the morning with our headlights illuminating the road in front of us, we drove up that mountain in order to find a spot to watch the sunrise. And sure enough, there were plenty of other people already gathered there well before we got there, huddled against the rocks and waiting to see the sun rise that morning. As we chatted with one another and tried to stay cool in the cold air that morning, we kept looking out at the horizon. And soon we began to notice that the colors were lightening ever so softly in the sky. That once where there was dark navy blue, it became a lighter blue, and then shifted into purple and pinks until all of a sudden the sun burst above the horizon, burst above where the ocean met the sky, and quickly began to rise higher and higher into the morning sky. Now, when you watch the sunrise, it can seem like that moment when the sun appears over the horizon happens in an instant. But the work of the sun beginning to rise happens in the dark, before the color begins to lighten the sky and even give us a hint that something is taking place. Now, this morning, the sunrise at Cadillac Mountain began at 5:53 a.m. And here in Summit, New Jersey, the sunrise took place at 6:21 in the morning. Now, I don't know about you, but I imagine many of us were probably still asleep. And yet, even while we were sleeping, the colors slowly but surely began to shift until the sun appeared over the horizon. Now, my dog decided to wake me up at about 5:30 in the morning, well before the sun was going to rise, well before the colors began to shift in the sky. But as I looked and saw the darkness around me, I heard birds already beginning to sing and fill the air with their song. You know, even if we can't see it just yet, the sunrise already begins in the darkness of the pre-dawn morning. Now imagine with me that as Mary Magdalene and the other Mary are going out to the tomb, the colors in the sky are beginning to lighten around them. Matthew tells us that it's early in the morning, before the sun had even risen that day, that they go out to see the tomb. Matthew doesn't note that they bring any spices or herbs with them, and so I think they're going out there simply to come and see, to confirm that what took place a couple of days ago had actually happened, that Jesus was indeed crucified and buried, because everything had happened so fast. It was just a week ago that people were cheering and celebrating for him. And even on the day that he was put to death, they had to rush to bury the body in order to observe the customs of Sabbath. So perhaps in coming out early in the stillness and the quiet of the pre-dawn morning, They were coming simply to gain a sense of closure, to glimpse the finality of what had happened and taken place. When they get there, the tomb is just as it was the other day when Jesus was buried in it. It's still and silent, the rock closing it off to the rest of the world. And then suddenly, in an instant, the quiet of the dawn is interrupted by a powerful earthquake. The ground begins to tremble and shake, and an angel appears as fast and as brilliant as lightning, and he rolls back the stone from the tomb, and then, to cap off this bizarre, sudden change of events, he sits on the rock and smiles proudly, like nothing out of the ordinary has happened that morning. Talk about an Easter with fanfare, right? It has got to be quite the sight. Mary and Mary are afraid. The guard who is standing watch over the tomb faints out of fear, and this whole scene is confusing and chaotic and filled with drama. And in the midst of all of this suddenness and confusion and chaos, the angel points out something to the women that we can easily miss in all of the Easter fanfare. The angel says, "I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised as he said." By the time Mary and Mary show up at the tomb, the resurrection has already happened. Now, we're so used to celebrating Easter with great fanfare, with bright flowers and lots of music and sunlight, that the loss and the change in these familiar traditions and routines can feel really disorienting and weird. But I think in a lot of ways, how we are celebrating and observing Easter this year is more similar to that first Easter than we may realize. A couple of years ago, I read a book by author Barbara Brown Taylor called Learning to Walk in the Dark. And she shared in that book something that has changed how I see Easter every year. She writes that everyone who saw the risen Jesus saw him afterwards, after the resurrection. That whatever happened in the tomb and in the cave that first Easter morning happened in the dark, in the midst of complete silence and absolute darkness. And she goes on to say, new life starts in the dark. Whether it's a seed planted in the ground, a baby in the womb, or Jesus in the tomb, it all starts in the dark. Not with the sun breaking out over the horizon, not with earthquakes and lilies and great fanfare. The resurrection started when Mary and the other disciples were still grieving, when they were still in shock at what happened to Jesus. Let me say that again. Resurrection happens in the dark, in our grief and our sense of loss, in our times of hardship, when we're not certain what lies ahead or what things will look like on the other side of this thing that we are struggling with. That's when quietly, perhaps without us even realizing it at first, that God begins the work of resurrection. Now, the power of this, the deep implications of what this new life and this new possibility can mean for us and for those around us, it takes time to develop, and it takes time for us to fully grasp and realize all of what it can mean and all of what it promises and offers to us. And there are times when this happens quickly, like the suddenness of that earthquake and the angel appearing, when we realize with a jolt that things are different and there is something new, something good that wasn't here before. But resurrection also happens like a sunrise, when maybe we hear the sound of birdsong in the dark long before we see the light begin to change in the sky. Long before we see the colors begin to shift. But slowly, we see small signs, small glimpses that new life is emerging where it wasn't before. Now, when the angels tell Mary that the resurrection has already happened, that Jesus has already been raised before they got there, what the angel is saying is that in our grief, in death, in these times of hardship, God has already been present, guiding them through what's been happening, guiding them through these difficult patches, bringing forth something different than what they expected. And the empty tomb that they come and discover that morning, as the sky begins to change into light and around them, that was the last thing that they expected to find. And yet that empty tomb became the first sign of something new. The first sign that there are possibilities beyond death. The first sign that love and life are stronger. That God can look upon even death, even the most broken of situations, and transform it into new life through resurrection. Now this year, we're waiting for an Easter dawn. Certainly, as we continue to go through this global pandemic together, we are waiting. But we also have other areas in our lives where we wait the dawn as well. Situations of illness, broken relationships, situations that seem like they can't possibly change. But even as we wait for an Easter dawn in these places, we claim once again our faith that God is with us in the midst of these difficult times, guiding us through to that new day, that here and now, God is working resurrection. And as surely as the night changes to day, there are glimpses and signs of that new life, signs of new possibilities emerging around us. Now, in this past week, I've seen all kinds of stories and headlines that offer us signs of this resurrection hope and this new life that is beginning to emerge in. People are finding new ways to connect with each other, even as we practice social distancing. There's been reports that pen pals have become more popular over the past couple of weeks as people are connecting with others in ways they haven't before. I've seen houses in my neighborhood putting up signs in their windows, decorations, things to make a scavenger hunt as our neighborhoods come together in ways that they didn't just a month ago. I've seen reports that farms are giving their surplus crops to food banks. People in our own towns and communities are donating to our mission partners, to community resource agencies, to offer food so that way those who are in need can get a meal and can have food to sustain themselves. Medical teams, even in this moment, are suiting up and going out to protect and to save lives. All around us, resurrection is happening. And the thing is, the stone is rolled away from the tomb not to let Jesus out, but to let the witnesses in, to give us the opportunity to see a sign of this new life that is happening. Now, I just want to note that when the women witnessed all this, after the confusion and the shock of what they saw and experienced when the angel told them Jesus wasn't there, they went forth from the tomb with great fear and with great joy. You see, even with this news, death is still death. Hard times are still difficult, and the road through them can be long and taxing. But joy and hope can coexist alongside fear and grief. And trust me, when the women glimpsed Jesus as they ran forth, they felt that hope and that joy even as it sat there next to their grief and sadness. Even in our own fear and our grief, whatever it is that we may be feeling this day, we can claim life and we can claim and look for the signs of new life that are happening in our midst. Friends, Christ is risen. That is a promise and a proclamation, our way of saying Easter isn't just about what God has done long, long ago, but it is also about what God is doing here and now as God leads us forward into new life. Easter is happening. God is the one doing the work of resurrection, and God is taking care of it now. We are the witnesses to the signs of new life as they emerge around us. What signs of new life are you seeing? In all that we may be feeling and experiencing this day with hope, let us bear witness and claim God's resurrection, hope, and power. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Alleluia and amen.